They say family is supposed to protect you, to nurture your dreams and fight for your future. But what happens when the very people you trust the most quietly steal that future from you, then smile like nothing ever happened? I grew up believing my parents had my back. They told me stories of sacrifice, of how they were saving for my education since I was little. I believed them every step of the way. My dad would pat my shoulder and say, "One day this money will open doors for you that we never had." My mom would smile and add, "We're investing in your future, sweetheart. So study hard. We've got you covered." So I studied. I worked harder than anyone I knew. I was the kind of kid who woke up early for school, stayed up late finishing assignments, and refused to skip a single class. My dream was to go to college, to build a life that was mine, not handed to me, not borrowed, not stolen. I wanted to earn it. But when the time came, when acceptance letters started arriving in the mail and I felt like the world was finally about to open up, I discovered something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. The college fund I had been promised for years, the money my parents swore they had set aside for me, it was gone. Not spent on emergencies, not lost in bad investments, not even touched for household needs. It was used to buy my brother a car. And not just any car. A flashy, fully loaded one with leather seats, custom rims, and a price tag so absurd it could have covered my entire first year of tuition, and then some. That was the day the truth hit me. In my parents' eyes, I was never the priority. My brother was. Always had been. Always would be. But here's the part they didn't expect. They thought they could throw me aside, that I'd accept it quietly. Maybe resentfully, but without fight. They thought they could rob me of my future, and I'd still play the role of the good child who smiled through the pain. They were wrong. Because years later, while my brother was struggling to keep that same car running, I stood in front of the house my parents once called their own, the house I now owned. This is the story of how my parents stole my college fund, gave my brother everything, and expected me to crumble. Instead, I built something stronger than they could have ever imagined. And trust me, the day they realized they had to pay rent to me, their less important child, was the sweetest moment of justice I've ever known. If I look back on my childhood, it feels almost like a play where each character already knew their role, except me. My parents had written the script long before I even understood what favoritism was. My brother, Ethan, was the star of the show. I was background noise. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't neglected in the sense of being unfed or unclothed. My basic needs were met. I had a roof over my head, food on the table, and clothes to wear. But what I didn't have was recognition. What I didn't have was equality. And when you're a child, you don't have the vocabulary to name that feeling. You just know something isn't right. One of my earliest memories of this favoritism was on Ethan's 12th birthday. He wanted a bicycle, specifically a sleek blue mountain bike that had gears and shocks and looked like something out of a commercial. It was expensive, at least from my parents' perspective back then, but they bought it anyway. The smile on Ethan's face that day could have lit up the entire neighborhood. When it was my birthday 6 months later, I asked for a simple art set. I wasn't into sports like Ethan. I loved drawing, painting, and sketching, but I thought maybe if I got a proper art kit, I could start practicing seriously. My parents nodded politely when I told them, and I assumed that meant yes. On my birthday, I opened my gift with excitement, only to find a plastic set of crayons and a cheap coloring book, the kind you could buy at the dollar store. Ethan leaned over, smirked, and said, "Guess you're not that special." My parents didn't correct him. They laughed. That moment stuck with me, not because of the crayons, but because of the message. Ethan's dreams were worth investing in, Mine were worth laughing at. As we grew older, this pattern didn't just continue, it intensified. Ethan was athletic, popular, and always surrounded by friends. My parents treated his soccer games like sacred events, showing up with snacks, cheering from the stands, and even hosting team parties at our house. Meanwhile, when I won second place in a regional spelling bee, my mom barely looked up from her phone when I told her. My dad muttered a distracted, "That's nice, honey," and then asked Ethan how soccer practice went. It was like I was invisible. But here's the kicker. They always had this excuse that made it sound almost noble. They'd say things like, "We're investing in Ethan because sports might get him a scholarship one day," or, "You're the smart one, you'll figure things out." At first, I believed them. I convinced myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't need their help as much. Maybe being the smart one meant I had to accept less attention, less love, fewer resources. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about logic. It was about preference. They simply liked Ethan more. By the time we hit high school, the difference was glaring. Ethan got a brand new phone when he turned 16. Not the latest model, but still shiny and new. I got his old hand-me-down, complete with scratches and a battery that barely lasted 2 hours. When Ethan wanted driving lessons, my parents immediately signed him up at the most reputable driving school in town. When I asked, they told me, "We can't afford it right now. You'll just have to wait." I waited and waited. And by the time I finally got my license, Ethan was already zipping around town in his first car, a used but reliable Honda Civic, courtesy of Mom and Dad. I rode the bus, but the one thing that kept me sane through all of this was the belief that at least one thing was secure: my college fund. My parents had started talking about it when I was around 10. They'd sit me down at the kitchen table, smile proudly, and tell me, "We're putting money aside for you every year. When the time comes, you'll have what you need." It was the promise that kept me going. Every time I felt overshadowed, I reminded myself, this isn't forever. One day I'll get out. I'll go to college. I'll build a life of my own. I studied relentlessly. I became the kind of student teachers loved, organized, dedicated, always aiming higher. My GPA was impressive, my extracurriculars stacked, my recommendations strong. I didn't just want to get into college, I wanted to thrive. And I thought finally I'd have my parents' support. But little did I know, that so-called college fund was never really mine. It was a mirage, a story they told me to keep me motivated while quietly funneling money elsewhere. And the first crack in that illusion appeared one quiet evening when I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was sitting in my room studying when my parents' voices drifted up the hallway. They were talking in low tones, but a few words carried clearly enough to make my stomach twist. The car will cost around $25,000, my dad said. "But Ethan deserves it, after all his hard work," my mom replied. At first, I thought nothing of it. A car? Sure. Maybe they were planning to buy Ethan a graduation gift, but then my dad added something that froze me in place. "We can just pull it from the fund." The fund. My fund. I remember sitting there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I misheard. Maybe they meant a different fund. Maybe it was just temporary. Maybe, just maybe, I was jumping to conclusions. But in my gut, I already knew. That promise, that security I'd clung to for years, was about to vanish. And the worst part? They weren't even hesitating. They didn't think twice about sacrificing my future to give my brother a shiny car. And that was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying my dad's words over and over like a broken record. "We can just pull it from the fund." Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan grinning behind the wheel of some shiny new car, while I stood on the sidelines, clutching my acceptance letter with no way to pay tuition. I told myself I needed to stay calm, to wait for confirmation before I jumped to conclusions. But the truth was, deep down, I already knew what was happening. My parents had always chosen Ethan over me. Why would this be any different? Still, I wanted proof. The next day, I tiptoed into the study when my parents were out. My dad kept a locked filing cabinet for important documents. I had seen him open it dozens of times, so I knew the code. With shaking hands, I turned the dial and pulled the drawer open. Inside were folders labeled with neat handwriting: taxes, mortgage, insurance, and then, at the very back, one labeled college fund. My heart leapt. This was it. The evidence that all those years of saving hadn't been a lie. I pulled it out, eager to see how much had accumulated over the years. But when I opened the folder, my stomach dropped. There were statements, yes, but the numbers didn't add up. The balance was far lower than it should have been, barely a fraction of what I'd expected. Even worse, the most recent withdrawals were glaringly obvious. Tens of thousands of dollars had been pulled out in the last 6 months alone, and right there in black and white was the note, payment, Honda Civic, Ethan. I remember just staring at the page, my hands trembling as anger, grief, and disbelief all crashed over me at once. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the betrayal. My parents had lied to me for years. They had promised me security only to take it away without hesitation. For him. I shoved the folder back and closed the drawer just as I heard the front door slam. My parents were home. I raced back to my room, my heart pounding, and sat at my desk pretending to study. But my mind was boiling. That evening, at dinner, I couldn't keep it in anymore. "Mom, Dad," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "can I ask you something about my college fund?" My dad looked up from his plate, frowning slightly. What about it? I was just curious. "How much is in it now?" They exchanged a quick glance. Too quick. My mom forced a smile. "Don't worry about that, honey. You'll have what you need when the time comes." My jaw clenched. They were lying. I knew it. I checked. I said quietly. The room went silent. Ethan froze, fork halfway to his mouth. My mom's smile vanished. My dad set his knife down with a deliberate clink. "What do you mean you checked?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I saw the folder," I admitted. "I know about the withdrawals." "I know you used it for Ethan's car." My brother's eyes widened, and then he smirked like it was funny. My dad's face turned red while my mom's eyes filled with irritation. Not guilt, not regret, irritation. "You had no right to go through our files," my dad snapped. "No right?" My voice shook, but I didn't back down. "You promised me that money was for college. You told me for years it was safe, and now it's just gone?" My mom sighed like I was being unreasonable. "It's not gone. We just reallocated some of it. Ethan needed a reliable car. You'll understand when you're older." "When I'm older?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I'm about to graduate high school. I need that money now, for tuition, for applications, for everything you told me it was meant for." My dad slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. Enough. We did what we thought was best for this family. Ethan needed that car to get to practice, to games, to work. You'll get by. You always do. You're smart. You'll find scholarships. There it was again. That excuse. You'll figure it out. As if my hard work, my dreams, my future were less important than my brother's convenience. My hands curled into fists. So that's it? Years of saving, years of promises, and when it matters most, you just hand it over to him? What about me? What about my future? Ethan finally spoke then, his tone dripping with arrogance. Relax, sis. It's just money. Don't be so dramatic. I whipped my head toward him, my anger boiling over. Just money? That was my entire future, Ethan. While you're cruising around town, I'm supposed to... What? Take out crippling loans? Drop out? He shrugged, grinning. Not my problem. My chest tightened. The unfairness of it all was suffocating. My parents sat there silent, watching me unravel, and not once did they apologize. Not once did they admit they were wrong. Finally, my mom shook her head. We're not going to argue about this anymore. What's done is done. You'll figure something out. You always do. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but more than anything, I wanted to prove them wrong. That night, as I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, something hardened inside me. For the first time, I realized that I couldn't rely on them, not for support, not for fairness, not even for honesty. If I wanted a future, I'd have to fight for it myself. And little did I know that fight would take me down a path that none of us could have predicted. Because if they thought they could steal my dreams without consequences, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. After that dinner, something inside me snapped. I stopped waiting for fairness. I stopped hoping my parents would wake up one morning and suddenly see me as their child instead of an afterthought. Instead, I started preparing for war. The very next day, I went to the guidance counselor's office at school. Mrs. Kennedy was one of those teachers who actually cared, the kind who remembered details about her students' lives and always had a granola bar in her drawer, just in case. When I told her what had happened, her eyes softened in a way my parents never did. They used your college fund? She asked gently, as if confirming it out loud would make it real. I nodded, fighting back tears. For Ethan. For his car. They told me I'd have to figure something out. Mrs. Kennedy sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. I'm so sorry, sweetie. But listen, this doesn't have to be the end of your dream. There are scholarships, grants, work-study programs. It'll be hard, but it's possible. Hard. Possible. Those words became my new mantra. From that moment, I threw myself into applications like my life depended on it. Because it did. I spent hours in the library filling out forms, writing essays, chasing every lead Mrs. Kennedy gave me. Local organizations, national scholarships, obscure awards that required a 5-page essay on the meaning of leadership. I did them all. Meanwhile, I picked up a job at a local coffee shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. I worked evenings and weekends pouring lattes and scrubbing counters until my hands ached. And every paycheck, no matter how small, went straight into a savings account I opened in my name alone. It was exhausting. My days blurred together. School, work, homework, applications, repeat. Some nights I fell asleep at my desk, my head resting on piles of financial aid forms. But I didn't complain. Because every dollar I earned, every essay I submitted, felt like one more brick in the foundation of a future I was building with my own 2 hands. My parents noticed, of course, but instead of being proud, they acted annoyed. You're never home anymore, my mom complained one evening when I came in late, smelling like espresso. I'm working, I said flatly, kicking off my shoes. You don't need to work, she replied. You should be focusing on your studies. I let out a bitter laugh. You mean the studies you told me I'd have to pay for myself? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't have an answer. Ethan, meanwhile, was living his best life. With his new car, he became even more popular. He was out late, driving his friends around, showing off like he was king of the world. Sometimes he'd toss me a smug look as he jingled his car keys, like he knew exactly what it had cost me. And the worst part? My parents enabled it. They covered his gas money, paid for his insurance, even helped him with maintenance, all while telling me, we can't afford to help you right now. The hypocrisy was suffocating, but I kept going. By spring, my hard work started to pay off. Acceptance letters began arriving in the mail. Thick envelopes, not the dreaded thin ones. I got into 3 great schools, each offering me partial scholarships. When I showed my parents, they gave me a distracted nod, like I'd told them what I ate for lunch. "Good job," my dad said, without looking up from the TV. Ethan walked by, glanced at the letter in my hand, and smirked. "Hope you can actually afford it." His words cut deep, but they also fueled me. Because what he didn't know was that I had been offered one scholarship that changed everything. A full-ride merit-based award from a university 2 states away. It covered tuition, housing, books, the works. When I opened that letter, sitting alone in my room, I burst into tears. Not just from relief, but from pride. I had done it. Without my parents' help, without their money, without their support, I had carved out my own future. Of course, when I told them, their reaction was muted. "That's nice," my mom said, stirring a pot of spaghetti. "But are you sure you want to go so far away?" "Yeah," Ethan chimed in, smirking. "Who's going to make your bed when you're gone?" I ignored them. I was already halfway out the door in my mind. Leaving for college was like finally stepping into the sunlight after years of being trapped in the shadows. I packed my things, loaded my beat-up suitcase into the back of a bus, because unlike Ethan, I didn't have a car, and headed toward freedom. At school, I thrived. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who saw me for who I was, not who I wasn't. Professors praised my work. Friends admired my determination. I joined clubs, volunteered, and even picked up a campus job to keep some extra cash flowing. It wasn't easy. I still worked late nights. I still missed out on parties because I was studying or working shifts. But every sacrifice felt worth it, because each step forward was mine and mine alone. Back home, though, things were different. My parents rarely called. When they did, it was usually to brag about Ethan, his games, his friends, his life. Once, during a rare visit home, I noticed something strange. Ethan's car wasn't the same Honda Civic I'd seen him driving when I left. It was newer, shinier. "Is that another car?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan grinned. "Yep, Mom and Dad helped me upgrade, said I deserved it." My stomach turned. Another car, more money, more proof that no matter how much I achieved, I'd always come second in their eyes. But what they didn't realize was that while they were busy feeding Ethan's ego, I was building something far more valuable than a car. I was building independence. By junior year, I had saved enough money from work and internships to put a down payment on a tiny condo near campus. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom with creaky floors and peeling paint. But it was mine. No more dorms, no more hand-me-downs. My space, my rules. And with every step I took, the gap between me and my family grew wider. They still didn't see it. They thought I was just scraping by, surviving on luck. But what I was really doing was laying the groundwork for a future they couldn't touch. Because one day, all their favoritism, all their lies, all their so-called sacrifices for Ethan would come crashing down. And when it did, they'd have no choice but to come knocking on my door. The same door to the house I would one day own. By the time I was in my final year of college, the cracks in my parents' perfect world were starting to show. It began with Ethan. For years, he had coasted on the golden child treatment. Cars, money, endless support. But the one thing he hadn't developed was accountability. While I was studying late nights and building a future brick by brick, Ethan was skipping classes, partying, and treating life like a game he couldn't lose. Except life doesn't work like that. Word reached me through one of his old high school friends that Ethan had dropped out of college after his first year. It just wasn't for him, my mom said when I asked about it, her voice casual as if this was a minor detail. He'll figure something out. I nearly laughed. He'll figure something out. That was their favorite excuse. For him. Not for me. For me, it was always, you'll figure it out. For Ethan, it was don't worry. He'll land on his feet. But Ethan wasn't landing on his feet. He was falling. The car payments piled up, insurance, gas. Then came credit cards, nights out, tabs he never closed. And every time he stumbled, guess who picked him up? Mom and Dad. Except they were stumbling too. When I came home one winter break, I noticed things that didn't add up. The house felt different, not in a cozy, redecorated way, but in a strained, falling apart way. The roof had a leak. The paint was peeling. The fridge was nearly empty. At dinner, I overheard them whispering about late mortgage payments, about overdue bills, about money that just wasn't stretching far enough. And yet, right there in the driveway sat Ethan's brand new car, shiny, polished, spotless, a monument to misplaced priorities. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how they could be so blind, how they could still pour money into Ethan while their house literally crumbled around them. But instead, I bit my tongue, because a part of me knew this was exactly the path they had chosen. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I had graduated near the top of my class, landed a steady job with a decent salary, and was finally beginning to breathe after years of suffocating under their neglect. My condo, small as it was, became my sanctuary. Every paycheck I saved, every investment I made was another step toward security, toward freedom. And then, one day, opportunity knocked. A colleague at work mentioned that her neighbor was looking to sell a small house at a ridiculously low price. It needed work, plumbing, wiring, cosmetic upgrades, but the foundation was solid. It was the kind of deal you didn't pass up. I ran the numbers. With my savings and a modest loan, I could afford it. Barely. So I did it. I signed the papers, and just like that, I became a homeowner. At 24, it wasn't glamorous. The house had creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and a backyard that looked like a jungle. But it was mine. I spent weekends scraping, painting, fixing, and slowly transforming it into something beautiful. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, felt like reclaiming a piece of the future my parents had stolen from me. When I finally invited a few friends over for a housewarming, they were stunned. "You bought this? At your age?" they asked. And the pride in their voices was something I had craved my entire life. Meanwhile, back home, things were unraveling faster than ever. Ethan had racked up so much debt that creditors were calling the house daily. My dad's hours had been cut at work. My mom picked up odd jobs, but it wasn't enough. The mortgage fell behind, and then came the call. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice shaky, we're in a bit of a situation." I stayed quiet, letting her explain. "The bank is threatening foreclosure," she admitted. "Your father's paycheck just isn't enough, and with Ethan's expenses—" I cut her off. "Ethan's expenses? You mean his car, his nights out, his debt?" There was silence on the line. Then she said the words I had been expecting, yet still couldn't believe. "We were hoping you might be able to help. Just a little. Until we get back on our feet." I leaned back in my chair, the irony hitting me like a wave. The same parents who drained my college fund, who laughed off my achievements, who told me to figure it out, were now asking me for help. And the truth was, I could help. I had savings. I had stability. I had built a life they never thought I could. But part of me burned with anger. Why should I? Why should I bail them out after everything they had taken from me? I didn't give her an answer that day. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. But inside, I already knew. this was the moment everything shifted, because for the first time in my life, the power was in my hands. Not theirs, not Ethan's, mine. And the next time we spoke, I would make sure they understood that. They thought they could rob me of my future. But now the roles had reversed, and soon enough, the house they once lorded over me would no longer be theirs to control. It would be mine. The second call came a week later. This time it wasn't my mom's shaky voice on the other end. It was my dad. "Listen," he said, trying to sound firm, but there was an edge of desperation he couldn't hide. "The bank is finalizing foreclosure proceedings. If we don't come up with the money, we'll lose the house." I stayed silent, letting him twist in the silence. Then he added, "This house belongs in the family. We need you to step up. Your brother, he's not in a position to help right now." I almost laughed. Not in a position. Ethan was drowning in debt and still posting pictures of himself at bars, sipping cocktails. And now, suddenly, the responsibility fell on me. The child they ignored, belittled, and drained dry when it suited them. "You mean," I finally said, my voice calm, "the house belongs to Ethan? Isn't that what you always said? That everything was his? My college fund, the cars, the attention, the pride?" My father sighed heavily. "That was different." "No," I shot back. "It wasn't. You made it clear where I stood in this family. Now you want me to save the very house you said wasn't mine?" Silence. Finally, he said, "So, will you help or not?" I leaned back, a smirk tugging at my lips. "Maybe. But not in the way you think." When the foreclosure notice officially arrived, I was ready. I had spoken with the bank, run the numbers, and positioned myself perfectly. And then, just like that, I bought the house. The same house where I had been treated like a second-class citizen. The same house where Ethan had been crowned the golden child. The same house my parents thought I'd never belong to. The irony was delicious. When I broke the news to my parents, they were stunned. You bought it?" My mom stammered, her face pale. "Yes," I said simply. "It's mine now. Legally. But where are we supposed to live?" she whispered. I didn't flinch. "Here, if you want. But things have changed. You'll be tenants. You'll pay rent." To me, the silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever heard. My dad's jaw tightened, his pride wounded. Ethan looked like someone had just slapped him across the face. "Rent? To you?" He spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "That's insane. This is our house." "No," I said firmly. "It was. Now it's mine." "The bank doesn't care about your feelings, Ethan. They cared about money, and I was the only one who had it." My mom's eyes welled up. "Sweetheart, please don't do this. We're family. The same word they used to justify robbing my college fund. The same word they twisted to defend giving Ethan everything and me nothing." I met her gaze, cold and steady. "Family doesn't mean using one child to prop up another. Family doesn't mean draining one kid's future so the other can have luxury. Family doesn't mean ignoring me until you need something. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." And so, the roles reversed. They signed the rental agreement, their pride swallowed whole. Every month the checks arrived, made out to me. My father, the man who once told me Ethan deserved everything I had, now handed me rent money to stay in the house he once lorded over me. The power shift was intoxicating, but more than that, it was justice. Ethan didn't last long. Within months, he moved out, too ashamed to live under my roof. He bounced from apartment to apartment, his debt piling higher, his life unraveling with every poor choice. My parents stayed longer, though the tension was always there. Every time they slipped the envelope into my hand, I saw the flicker of humiliation in their eyes. But I also saw something else. respect, the kind they never gave me before, because I had done what they never believed I could. I built a life of independence. I owned property. I had security, and I hadn't needed their help, not once. Looking back, I realized something important. They thought by giving Ethan everything, they were setting him up for success. But in reality, they crippled him. They made him dependent, entitled, weak. And by giving me nothing, they forced me to become strong. They forced me to fight, to hustle, to claw my way into a future that was entirely my own. In a twisted way, their favoritism was the greatest gift they could have given me, because it taught me resilience. Now, when I walk through the halls of my house, the house they once said wasn't mine, I feel something powerful. Not just pride, not just satisfaction, vindication. Because in the end, they gave Ethan everything, and I still came out on top.